suboptimal. So I'm Joe Justice. I'm the team lead of Team WIKISPEED, and my next card is 100 miles per gallon. Team WIKISPEED is, exactly as Artis said, a group of now 107 volunteers in 7 countries. And actually just last week, one of those volunteers gave a talk at the European Agile Leadership Engagement in Berlin, Germany. And I believe we'll have a few more countries represented soon. Hoping for, well, we'll see. And it started with an idea of what if we could take what was working well in lean, fast-moving software teams. My day job, I was a software developer, and now I'm an Agile coach and a cloud consulting coach at Redact, a company in Belgium. And seeing dramatic successes in large enterprise deliveries done much, much faster than most people thought they could be done, thanks to this new way of doing business called Agile. And it ties into these other ways of doing business called Lean and Scrum. And we'll actually get to jump into a little bit more about what I mean by those terms as it applies to software and then outside of software. WIKISPEED was this grand experiment, and our platform was the Progressive Insurance Automotive X Prize. In 2008, the Progressive Insurance Automotive X Prize put a $10 million prize purse on, is it possible to make 100 mile per gallon cars that people would want to drive, that meet road legal specifications and are fully safe? They attracted 136 cars from around the world to campaign for that prize. At that time, nothing like that existed. The challenge was first to say, is it even possible to create 100 mile per gallon cars? The current state was something a lot like a bobsled, where someone laid down one person and they would slowly turn left in a temperature-controlled velodrome, and they would obtain over 100 miles per gallon. The engine would take the car to 25 miles an hour across the start line to measure efficiency, and would coast down to 5 miles an hour. Then the engine would fire 5 times, bring them back up to 25, and they would continue coasting. And we had these phenomenally efficient vehicles that were not able to transport 4 adults safely from point A to point B in traffic. The X Prize said, is that even possible? If so, we will put $10 million on it. And at that time, there's a little star here. Am I still in range? Are we okay? There's a little star here in Denver, Colorado at that time that says WIKISPEED. That was my garage. At that time, it was just me, this big idea guy, not long out of college, really excited about cars. I was a car nerd. I was an efficiency nerd, and I was a sophomore, and I was a software nerd. And I was rapidly becoming a software process nerd and learning as much as I could about Agile, Lean, and Scrum. And I started to blog about all the successes and all the failures I was having, and decided very early on to be radically transparent. It was a choice I made. And what happened was, by asking really nerdy questions, I got really nerdy answers back from people who were really deep in that space. So for example, the parking brake on most of our cars, the brake pads float on the rotor, and there's some parasitic losses. So you don't have your parking brake engaged, and yet there's still some rub between the the brake pad and the brake rotor. To shoot for anything like 100 miles per gallon, I had to get rid of that. How would I? And so I'm asking these nerdy questions. What would be an alternative that would be something I could guarantee for 36,000 miles, wouldn't be overly complex or expensive? Some people stay up all night thinking about that, and they found me and left comments. And some of their ideas worked. And then by asking humdrum questions, like the car won't start again. I'm not from the automotive industry, I'm a software guy. I don't know why this system isn't working. And then I would also get more generalist answers. Well, people began to come by and visit, what was it then? My garage, and see what was going on. Did it match this thing they were reading about on the internet that they started to think was pretty cool? And they began staying and helping. I didn't know how I was going to compete against more than 100 companies with an average, according to them, as we asked around the paddock, investment of $5 million per company. I didn't know how we were going to compete against big names like Tesla and MIT. But then a collaborative, distributed, volunteer team ended up creating the answer to that, which I never would have foreseen. I just knew I couldn't not do it. I sat down and talked with my wife, and she said, Joe, if you don't try this, you'll always wonder for the rest of your life what would happen if you didn't. And so we actually took what we'd saved up to put a down payment on a house, and instead moved into a very small apartment, which we loved, and funded WIKISPEED. And then the volunteer team provided the effort. We became a finalist in the Progressive Insurance Automotive X Prize, meaning we passed all technical deliverables. This logo that says WIKISPEED right on it with these green laurels meant we'd become a finalist. When we put that on the car, it was a jumping high five heard around the world. And we were impossibly excited. We were actually legitimate now. It had gone from this neat idea and this neat what-if concept to a functional prototype. When we showed up at Michigan International Speedway, where the finals were ultimately held, 16 of the team members took time off work. Most of it was unpaid, paid for their own plane tickets and food and lodging to spend a week campaigning our car at MIS, Michigan International Speedway. And that's what it looked like at the time. I was one of the people who made it, and I don't think it's pretty. But it did have the aerodynamic profile we cared about. On the back, it looks very square. It's actually a NACA, the predecessor to NASA, airfoil shape that matches almost exactly the front. And then we have this rounded canopy, and then that entire front of the car is a minimized frontal area. It's about 2 feet off the ground, and then minus that canopy. So we have a relatively slippery shape with a very small frontal area, something that could carry 4 adults safely, and actually in some manner of comfort. We were required to have air conditioning, heat, defrost, and even a stereo. We posted 104 miles per gallon in simulation with the X Prize of the EPA city driving cycle, the same driving cycle all the cars we drive now are measured in, and 114 miles per gallon in the EPA highway driving cycle. Again, in X Prize simulation of those tests. Argonne Labs is where you get the certified EPA score, and that's actually something we're undergoing now that I'll talk about a little bit later in the deck. So we have this thing that's not very pretty, but ultra efficient and meets road legal spec. This thing has seatbelt anchors that comply with the Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 49 for overland transportation. It even has a stereo. In the center, we have Al Unser Jr., 2-time Indianapolis 500 winner. He was a hired driver for a team competing against us. They were next to us in the paddock, and he loved what we were doing. He loved how quickly we were able to change our car. And I'll get to talk about it a little more in a couple slides. It wasn't just that our car was quick and that it was efficient and that it met road legal specifications, which had never been done before, but it's that our car was able to change quickly. Now, ultimately, we tied for 10th place. We didn't get $10 million. Out of tying for 10th place, we did get international press. And at this time, our team was 44 team members in 4 countries. By not winning the X Prize, we rapidly grew to 56 team members in 6 countries. Here's what that car at the X Prize looked like if you lifted off that aero shell, that replaceable orange aerodynamic shape. We have these modules. Now, from a software development perspective, we would think of these as classes and objects with interfaces. What would that look like on a car? Well, this is one answer, and it ended up being very effective. It allowed us to come in ahead of more than 100 other teams. We came in ahead of Tesla, and MIT. And we're a group of people that most of us had never met, collaborating on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn. We were able to go toe-to-toe and actually do extremely well by engineering first an interface, a set of structural lugs on how these things would connect together and make a safe vehicle, and then have modules independent from each other that we could change without redeveloping an entire new car. So for example, here's a 2-foot by 2-foot plate of aluminum 6061 T6. That has our entire suspension attached to it. So just like the wheel attaches to the hub carrier using structural lugs on every car in the parking lot outside, then that entire suspension system attaches to the chassis using the same structural lugs. What that means is, here we have McPherson struts at all 4 corners. That ended up being the best setup for Michigan International Speedway, where we ultimately campaigned in the finals. But we're able to switch to double wishbone, or airplane wings, or tank treads in about 2 minutes. That means that when the X Prize said, you know what, the scoring criteria is the first car to get 100 miles per gallon on the EPA city and highway cycles that meets road legal spec, we could have not focused on our suspension setup. It was irrelevant to the competition. It's just about the other aspects that have more to do with efficiency. And then they say, well, what if, and they did, they changed the winning metrics many times over the course of the competition. They then said, well, what if multiple teams solve it right about the same time? Okay, let's say it's the fastest, because that'll make this huge media spectacle, and it'll be impossible for existing automotive to say it never happened. You can't make ultra-efficient vehicles, if it's even possible. And they said, all right, it's the fastest. Well, how do we measure fastest? They said, all right, we'll close off part of downtown Manhattan, and you'll have a road course so everyone will see. It can't not have happened. And so that course would be these long straightaways, and then these tighter than 90-degree hairpin turns. So you need something with a very high top speed, and then something that turns incredibly fast and then sets to go, which is a very specific type of suspension. Team said, all right, we need to focus on our suspension system. Then they said, no, it's actually going to be a cross-country rally, stopping at major cities along the way to shake hands with government personalities for photo ops, because that will be great for the cause that we're trying to push. And that's a very different type of suspension again. And many teams had to start building a new vehicle altogether, because your suspension is always considered completely integral to the way you design your chassis. We didn't. We developed another one next to it and tested it on, and it was very quick for us. Then they said it's going to end at Laguna Seca, and if we have any car nerds in the room, there might be some slow nods. Laguna Seca has this turn called the corkscrew. It's this uphill that looks like a mountain, and you don't see anything. And then it's this tight left-right, and it's a very different type of suspension yet again. And many teams started building their cars again. In our case, our modularity allowed us to switch types and test them in parallel. Now, it's not just the suspension. The front crush structure is a module. Right here in this picture, as campaigned at the X Prize, that's version 3 of our front crush structure. We started with this very complex shape, tested it for safety, iterated to see if we could make it more simple, tested it for safety, iterated to see if we could make it more simple, tested it for safety, until we ended up with a very simple geometric shape that met frontal crash test requirements, which I'll speak a little bit more about in the next slides. The entire interior lifts out like a bathtub. We had 2-seat and 4-seat versions of the car. So what that meant is when we were changing the suspension system, we could have an entirely separate team designing our seatbelt anchors. And we wouldn't have to re-engineer our seatbelt anchors even if we changed our steering system, our 4-channel ABS system, or even our drivetrain. The entire drivetrain rolls out on a pallet jack. So what that means, in about the time it takes us to change a tire, we can change from gasoline to methanol to ethanol to biodiesel to any battery chemistry we needed to test. So if a game-changing technology came out, say it was a battery chemistry, 2 weeks before race day, we would be able to implement that and campaign with it. And it would be very difficult for any other methodology to take advantage of it. We ultimately used a gasoline-only setup to post 104 miles per gallon on the city cycle and 114 miles per gallon on the highway cycle. No battery system other than the battery to start the engine. We use straight gasoline in this iteration, just very, very little of it. Here's a close-up of the suspension modules, the version right after the X Prize. The X Prize concluded in 2010. Here you see the McPherson strut setups, simplified A-arms, the body top strut mount. Again, this started as a very complex shape and then became simpler and simpler and simpler as we drove towards just the goals we cared about, which are comfort, speed, efficiency, all the goals that every car around us is built to. But when we're focused just on those and not trying to solve the problems that the chassis has inherent into it, we're able to simplify separately. Here's the chassis. Again, this started looking very much like many of the cars most of us probably drove here in. And we simplified and simplified and simplified until we came up with something extremely safe that would fit 4 adults. And this is the simplified shape that emerged out of aluminum extrusions, the same type of extrusions Lotus, Aston Martin, and Jaguar use. This picture shows some frontal loading. This picture is a lot more interesting for what we care about. Something unexpected emerged. This is the side impacts test. This blue box is the same size and shape of the deformable barrier that's crushed into the side of a car by the IAHS or NHTSA for side impact vehicle testing. It's put on a 5,500-pound sled, so a medium-duty pickup truck with some load in it, and towed into your car at 35 miles an hour. So if you imagine a medium-duty pickup truck with some sandbags in the back T-boning you at 35, that's how devastating this test is. What's looked for is penetration into the cabin and the energy pulse as it goes through the occupants. Is it survivable? And is there penetration into the cabin to the point where it's physically interacting with the occupants? If we spun the chassis this way, it would all be red. Red in this diagram means peak stress in this computational, in the CAE diagram. But something even more interesting is visible here. Again, red means peak stress. We have red on the complete opposite side of the chassis. What this simple geometric shape does is it channels load. It shears load from one side of the vehicle to the other. In a traditional vehicle, your side of the car, whatever the impact side is, needs to be heavy enough to withstand the entire brunt of that force, or most of it. What we've done is made sure that the entire structure as an aggregate withstands that load, because it communicates it, and not just from the side, but front, offset front, and when our roll bars are attached, roof crush and rollover, and rear. This is the lightest chassis currently known to achieve a 5-star crash rating equivalency, front, side, rear, roof crush, and rollover, ever. And it was designed by a collaborative, distributed group of people on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, by us, by Team WIKISPEED. After the X Prize, all of that engineering went into campaigning our car in the X Prize. We said, well, we have all this press and our team just got bigger. Let's see if any part of what we discovered makes sense for the market, is interesting for people to obtain, for existing auto manufacturers to maintain, or maybe even something that people might want to drive. Let's see what we can upgrade. And we started with, well, we continued all the engineering paths, but then focused on aesthetics. We wanted to make sure it also looked as close to as cool as it performed as we could. So here we are in now Hillsdale, Michigan. We've opened a second shop now. So we're still in Denver, Colorado, and Hillsdale, Michigan, and we're just moving that shop from Denver, Colorado to Seattle, Washington. And this is a full-sized foam buck that's CNC machined. We're sanding it down, and in the back is a trapping that some of you may have worked with if you've worked on an Agile team before, a Kanban board. There's columns for backlog, things we haven't done yet, a column for in progress, what we're doing now, and a column for pending review, did we actually finish, and a column for done. And we use sticky notes to move tasks back and forth. We communicate that, we take pictures of it, and send it back and forth to each other. Now we use a piece of software called Scrummy that automates a lot of that for us, and I actually am a huge fan of Scrummy. This backlog has a task right here that probably says, sand the foam mold. And so that's exactly, I'm here, and then Lisa Ford is here, and there's probably 12 other people in different parts of this shop in this photo. We then laid it up in structural carbon fiber. And as part of this iterative process, We took a process that traditionally costs $36,000 without paying for any of the skill. The time and materials and machinery time for a car-sized body is $36,000. And then you end up typically paying several $million for the expertise of all the folks working on it. And then it takes a fair amount of time. If you have the design already created, 3 months would be fast track. We did it in 3 weeks, and that was due to a supplier delay. Our actual time from CAD to physical carbon was 3 days. And we had iterated this process just by being agile, lean, and then using that Scrum tactic. And it cost us $800. We were then invited to the North American International Auto Show, which shocked me. This is the largest auto show in the world. This was January of this year, January 2011. And 750,000 visitors came through. In fact, in terms of attendance, is why it's the largest auto show in the world. And 5,000 members of the credentialed media representing more than 50 countries. And I was panicked. All they had seen was our orange car body, and we knew we were working on something prettier, and it's a car show, but I didn't really know how it was going to go. The previous year, all companies that weren't the big three and then the other major automotive companies, a Honda, a Toyota, a GM, a Ford, a Chrysler, were in the basement, and so all green technology was there by default. And so I figured that's where we were going to go. They put us between Ford and Chevrolet on the main floor, and so the pressure really felt on. Luckily, we had a gorgeous exhibit in structural carbon fiber draped over the existing tested X Prize mechanicals, the same ultra-efficient mechanicals. We were able to put a completely different design because that body, again, isn't a module. It can look like anything we need it to look, or anything anyone wants it to look like, because the safety is inherent in the crush structures underneath, although the structural carbon adds an enormous other layer of energy absorption. But it looked really good, and we had fantastic press. In fact, the morning after our press conference, we were in the New York Times online, which I'd never expected. And we had press in every UN language, and we had a quote that I love to put at the top here, because that's what I always wish someone could have said about us. And it is, WIKISPEED is a reminder of the true spirit of the Detroit Auto Show. Some companies are still building mind-boggling, revolutionary cars because they can. Wow. And so we were, of course, excited more than ever, and the team rapidly grew to 70 team members in 7 countries. And Automobile Magazine did a 3-page article on us. They're typically considered the most conservative of the mainstream automotive publications. And they did above average Joe's can-do car company. And allocated 3 pages to us. And I sent a copy to my mom. And this, I think, is why people took the time to then see that we had this ultra-efficient package. This gentleman I'd never met before, Rob Moorbacher of Moore Composites, put together a CAD drawing of what he thought it should look like, and then validated the aerodynamics to make sure it was at least as good as our ugly orange aeroshell. And it ended up looking like a pure race car. It looks like a Le Mans prototype car. And I'm going to try to convince you that it's actually a family car. So this seats 4 adults. As you've seen in the diagram of the chassis, how 4 people fit in the car. And for the X Prize, we had to use 95th percentile males. So people that only 5% of the population, of the male population even, is larger than them. And 4 of them fit in the car. And without their knees touching their chest or anything like that. But then you look at these doors and say, really, isn't that just because it looks from the future, because it's this hot rod thing? Well, the car's wide, and so when we enter a turn, we don't have to use the brakes as much, meaning we don't have to accelerate as much, using as much energy as we exit the turn. And so the car is wide, but we wanted it to be able to park in a compact car parking space. So if doors opened the traditional way, we'd give our neighbors door dings, and we wanted to be good neighbors. So we said, all right, they need to either swing out, in which case we still might have that problem depending on how high they swing. Forward, or in reverse. And we realized the most ergonomic motion when seated was to pull the door shut this way. So this radical, in the hot rod circle, these are called suicide Lamborghini doors, or suicide scissors doors. And it just happens to be the most ergonomic layout and is also very cost effective to make. So we had a convergence of cool and utility. Now, the car, as it sits there, actually has enough storage for 20 grocery bags or 6 golf club bags, and achieves more than 100 miles per gallon. So Rob Moorbacher was really onto something. I'd never met him before. He took the time to develop all the CAD we needed to do to finish the car. We built the car, brought it to the North American International Auto Show, campaigned it, and that's where I met him for the first time. And that's where most of the team met him for the first time. And that type of interaction happens again and again and again through what Team WIKISPEED does. This is the next project Rob has done, and we've now opened another composite studio in Germantown, Maryland, and Rob is now producing this production mold to make these glossy convertibles over our ultra-efficient mechanicals. Now what's fun about this is with our chassis, what we cared about was meeting all the requirements for road legal safety and ultra-efficiency. And then we can put anything we want on top. It can look like the space shuttle, the Batmobile, whatever it may be. And Rob's capitalizing on this by making the car of his dreams, which looks awesome. We were then invited to the Future of Flight facility at Boeing's Payne Field for their World Earth Day celebration. And we had this triptych about how we machine the cars out of foam. So we go from a Libre CAD to a foam buck, to a refined foam buck, to a polished part that we then pull structural carbon from in 3 days. And that was part of our exhibit. And that blended with Boeing's 787 Dreamliner because it uses a composites-intensive structure for its efficiency method. And that overlaps on part of our efficiency method. So we definitely had some parallel, and the Future of Flight facility loved that, and we had a great time there on World Earth Day. They've now extended an invitation for a rotating exhibit there. So what's about to happen is there'll be the barrel of a 787 Dreamliner, an exposed carbon fiber. There'll be the cockpit of the Airbus A380. There'll be the Rolls-Royce Trent jet engine, and then the WIKISPEED 100 mile per gallon car. And we couldn't be more happy about that. Then the Discovery Channel Canada came and did a mini documentary on us, and this was just in July. So here's the car driving past our shop that was at that time in Shoreline, Washington, and has just moved to right by Alderwood Mall. And we're zipping by the corner and being filmed for this mini documentary. Again, something I never saw as happening when we were in my garage in Denver, Colorado, but that naturally grew out of this disruptive technology that we were making evidence and proving had merit. So that's what we've done, and that's where we've done it. And so our current state is we're 107 volunteers in 7 countries, and we have an R&D and testing facility right by Alderwood Mall. We have a small composites facility in Everett. We have a slightly larger composites facility in Germantown, Maryland, and we have a prototype assembly and manufacturing line in Hillsdale, Michigan. Now, how do we do that? How did we accomplish this? We use distributed collaborative Scrum. The trappings of Scrum, how to know that we're using Scrum, is that we have weekly stand-up meetings. Daily would be even better, but as something most of us are doing on nights and weekends, weekly is the effective cadence. And then we have a prioritized backlog, and then demos to the team. What those 3 things allow us to do is with a prioritized backlog, we always know what to do next. So someone doesn't have to wait for management to say, please do this next, or raise their hand even and say, I'm idle, I've finished my task. They look at the backlog and say, I know this is next most important. What's the thing closest to top in priority that I have the skills to do, or know someone I can pair with to conquer that task? Weekly stand-up meetings allow everyone to know the direction and vision of the entire projects that we're working on. During a weekly stand-up meeting, we say only 3 things, essentially. We say what I did last week, each person, what I'm going to do next week, I think, and any blocking issues. At the end of that meeting, everyone understands what piece of the puzzle they're in, what everyone else's blocking issues are, and how they're valuable to the company and how they can be most valuable to the company over the course of the next week. It continually re-ups commitment and continually informs without adding any overhead other than one weekly meeting. So with Agile, Lean, and Scrum, you typically have 2 meetings, one a day and one every 2 weeks or 1 week. So we've eliminated all this other time to focus on creative problem solving. And I'll actually go a little bit more into that in a moment. And now demos, we're continually making, showing the progress of all different units, which keeps morale high, but it also shares information. Everyone knows the current state every time we do a demo. How we communicate is our demos are uploaded to YouTube. So that means people around the world with no additional overhead can see our current state, what it is we're blocked on and what it is that we're solving. We then make team updates on Facebook and our team profile updates. So say someone joins the team from Spain. They would say, here's who I am, and I'll fan Team WIKISPEED's page on Facebook. And then the whole world knows the team has gotten this type of resource. And so someone who's thinking, I'd love to be part of Team WIKISPEED, but I think they've got all the composites engineering folks that they can wield right now. Well, they'll get to see that current status publicly and know if it makes sense for them to opt in. We use Dropbox and SkyDrive to share larger files, like say CAD. Some of our CAD gets quite complex. Some of our computational fluid dynamics or CAD models get quite complex, and so we use larger file share systems. We use freeconferencecall.com for our weekly stand-up meetings. They just added an international product, which is also free, and so we're able to have everyone call in once a week and receive our stand-up call updates and participate in stand-up. Also, we use Google Docs and Google Groups to share team information and status. All of these are free. We have no overhead. If we had tried to make a team like this 10 years ago, it would have been very cost prohibitive and in some cases, impossible. We've just rounded a technology curve where this is not only possible, it's free. Principles of this approach. By minimizing cost to make changes, we innovate quickly. Now, these are changes in team. So when we were at the North American International Auto Show, we met the person who founded GM's Aerodynamics Lab. He had worked there 40 years as the lead of that team, recently retired, and he joined Team WIKISPEED. Well, we wanted to take advantage of his knowledge right away. The car body changes about changing the rest of the car. We just dropped on another car body with updated aerodynamics. We didn't have to rebuild our braking system, our steering system, affect our powertrain at all, or change our chassis. We didn't have to change the way our seatbelts anchor or our steering wheel is positioned in the car. We could take advantage of that aerodynamics knowledge immediately. Tooling. By having modules, if it suddenly became very inexpensive for us to work with a blend of magnesium and aluminum honeycomb, we would be able to implement that in a module at a time, test and validate a module at a time, and begin scaling that in from the next day after that technology became cost effective to use. We wouldn't have to launch a new program, a new division, branch our processes, or even design a new car. We would do it piecemeal because we have this loosely coupled contract of how these modules interact. Components. If a game-changing battery chemistry came about, our drivetrain module rolls out as a unit. And all the car cares about is that whatever's back there responds to the go pedal and that it communicates fuel back. The chassis itself and the braking system, a separate module, handles braking. The steering module handles steering. So it could be a horse on a treadmill. And as long as somehow we could encourage the horse to move faster or slower with the gas pedal or the go pedal for whatever the method it is, and as long as the horse could somehow communicate back how tired it was and how much more range it had in it, that would be fine too. And so right now we have an electric powertrain in development with batteries and a flash as a partner, and Rob Beresford leading that effort. So that's able to switch into the team without redesigning any other piece than what had to change. Now even the goals, I mentioned how the X Prize scoring criteria continually changed. By making changes inexpensive in terms of time and money, we were able to even keep stride of the changing success criteria altogether. By loosely coupling modules, we make changes in parallel. It's very common that on a Thursday, we have build parties every Thursday at the Alderwood Mall area shop that will roll in the car and then split it into its constituent modules. Folks can be working on the suspension system. Some other group can be working on the powertrain. Another group can be working on the interior modules. Another group can be working on a dashboard or telematics setup where the infotainment, or we're putting an iPad in it now in the dash as part of the infotainment system, without stepping on each other's toes. By working collaboratively in a shared space, we unblock quickly. Something that software teams that use Agile, Lean, Scrum have noticed is if you put everyone in one room, you save time with knowledge transfer, and you avoid having to make as much documentation, and in some cases eliminate it entirely by replacing documentation with the conversation. How that works is there's constant chatter around you. And folks, first, that would be too distracting. As it turns out, velocity measured over time spikes. It ramps up. Because folks are always learning about the rest of whatever project they're working on, even when they're focusing on their piece. So in Team WIKISPEED, a new team member would walk in and say, I don't know what you're doing, but I care a lot about the environment, and I'd like to try to help somehow. They see a milling machine as one of our tools. They might not have ever seen a milling machine before, much less know how to use it. By the time they leave that night, well, first they'll enter a pair with someone who's more experienced on a given piece, take the highest card off the backlog that they think they can make progress on, work on it together, put the card in the in progress column. By the time they come back next, they saw someone near them using the milling machine because we have this clear line of sight and line of audio across the entire shop. And they'll say, okay, so I kind of understand that aluminum goes into this thing, they move this arm, and they have these adjustable work tables, and they're able to create shapes. I don't really know how it works, but now I have some concept. We didn't take any time away from their work to show them how to use the milling machine. It's completely peripheral knowledge. That second shop day, they're able to enter a pair with someone who's more experienced with the milling machine and actually be milling parts out of aluminum. By their third shop visit, they're able to lead a pair on the aluminum milling machine, for example. And that's true of all the tools and all the processes in the shop. And so that's by working in a shared space. Now, unblocking, when a pair hits something they really don't know how to solve, their body language changes. And their tone changes. And that's immediately perceptive. That's immediately perceived by everyone in the room. They don't even have to say, I think we're stuck. And what we do is a process that we borrow from extreme programming, where you do what extreme programming calls a swarm, where everyone comes to help. And they don't take it over and say, well, here, let me save it. They say, let me help, take a third tool, and work with that existing team. And we have yet to hit a block we weren't able to unblock with swarming. And that's a ridiculous thing to say when you're building a 100-mile-per-gallon car that no one has ever done before. By first automating tests, we quickly know if we've improved. Team WIKISPEED started with a row of red lights on a wall in a storage unit. And those red lights were things like, we have a 100-mile-per-gallon car. In fact, they were written in user story format, which is, as a driver, the car I'm driving gets 100 miles per gallon. And so that way we know who's doing what, and it's testable. And then we have, as a driver, I can decelerate from 70 miles an hour to 60 miles an hour within this certain time band. As a vehicle, I have a seatbelt anchor system that meets these Code of Federal Regulations specs. As a pedestrian, I can see a turn signal when I'm in this orientation to the car. Every piece of a road legal car was first authored in tests. And as many of these tests as possible were automated. That takes a lot of different thinking when you're going from automated tests in software, where it's compile and see if we broke the build, and then throw these inputs at it automatically, and then see if we get the results back we expect. So our automation equipment is we have a fixed jig to measure exhaust gas temperature and CO2, so that the test for our car can emit less than 200 grams of CO2 per mile. We know if we passed. What that did is, by having this bar of red lights across the room, whenever a red light turned green, everyone got excited. And everyone knew we had just moved forward. Also, if any work someone was doing didn't align to turning one of those lights from red to green, we knew work that we could kill early because it wasn't directly affecting our goals. And that's related to tests are success criteria. We don't measure pounds of earth moved. We don't measure lines of code written. In our case, we don't measure number of rivets. What we measure are our success criteria. So we don't even measure the weight of the car, which is, well, we absolutely measure it, but it's not a test because it doesn't directly affect fuel economy. What affects fuel economy is our fuel economy measurement, which is our EPA city and highway fuel economy scores. Because of that, no one's going to get very excited if we decreased bolt count across the car from 364 bolts to 320. They will get excited if we've gone from 104 to 105 miles per gallon on the EPA city cycle. That's the test we measure and nothing else. And that's why we're able to have high morale through these tests. Team morale is a multiplier for velocity. It's not a plus plus, it's not a minus minus, it's actually a multiplier. Some evidence for this is Team WIKISPEED, the version of the car we campaigned, the Progressive Insurance Automotive X Prize, was built in 3 months. And that it never existed before. This is seen again and again and evidenced in white papers from software teams, and as Agile, Lean, and Scrum are applied outside software, like to a prototype automotive part, which is part of our efforts, we see that again. Iterations and stubs make for constant successes. When we first put a suspension on the car, it was made of wood. Everyone got excited because the car was now at correct ride height and it looked more like a car. And they got to think about it more like a car, even though it wasn't the kind of thing we want to take to the track to test. It was made of wood. Our first parking brake, we knew we'd need a lever about here, and we knew that that's a problem that's perfectly solvable. There's many levers in many cars to apply many parking brakes, but we hadn't built ours yet. We put a cardboard box there. It was a stub. Everyone got excited because now they could build things right around it instead of just being off limits in that area and knowing, well, it's still in flux, I can't work there. Suddenly they could work there, and velocity improved. And then as that changed from a cardboard box to a really basic lever, to a pretty swank aluminum machined lever, to pieces with carbon fiber, every iteration is a reason for success and celebration, which feeds back into velocity. Here is the version of our shop right before the X Prize, showing modularized tools and inventory in a collaborative work area. We have a safety shelf with all the safety equipment we need. We have a power tools shelf with all power tools displayed in clear bins, nothing hidden in a drawer. The consumables underneath, so under drills or drill bits, under power sanding equipment is sanding drums and sanding wheels and flat discs. That allows anyone who walks in to say, oh, I see the tools that we have to work with, and immediately start framing what to do if they're savvy with those tools. And if they're not, they're already building a repertoire and becoming savvy with those tools, and they will see those tools used during the course of their shop day at Team WIKISPEED. Here is our shop as of July. We've already moved out of this shop, and it's been deprecated. You can see all transparent bins and different types of inventory. Here's a shot of one of our cars with the body off. One of our other cars is here behind it, and we have our now production Everlast TIG welder to be producing parts more quickly in shop. From common sense to manufacturing to software, and then now back to manufacturing. So lean is the concept of use less stuff, and there's an enormous amount of rigor applied around what do you use less of responsibly, and how much less can you use without eroding value or safety, depending on the marketplace you're in. In its essence, it's just the idea of use less stuff, and then an enormous amount of powerful science to know why and when to stop. That idea has been around since humans. That's not new and novel. It's use less stuff. In 1890s, early 1900s, Henry Ford became popularized with this movement, with the assembly line process, and with you can have your car in any color as long as it's black, and these types of decisions, which completely revolutionized the manufacturing space, and he was part of it. Definitely not the sole inventor. It paralleled interchangeable components in the firearms industry from years prior, but definitely popularized it and became a face for that movement. Japanese companies sent consultants to American companies to try to understand this, and other countries as well. The world as a whole paid attention. After World War II, Japan had the unique opportunity of rebuilding their manufacturing infrastructure and supply lines. They built it all according to lean principles as they understood them. Ended up becoming incredibly successful, and principles like the Toyota way, which could just as easily be called the Honda way, the Isuzu way, the Sanyo way to an extent. But Toyota, again, popularized that push, and it became exported back to the West in the 1960s as Lean Six Sigma, or quite a bit of it did. In the 1970s, software teams were in something that looked just like a factory. They were in buildings with custom poured footings for their computer infrastructure that had custom power requirements, and then the team to develop the code to run on this were at desks facing the same direction, with a manager's desk facing them schoolmarm style. And that paralleled very closely factories of the day. In the 1970s, software teams started to say, what can we get from things like Lean Six Sigma? How can we use less stuff? And they began iterative processes, making changes quickly and aggressively attempting to reduce costs to make changes. What's handy in the software space, when they want to make a radical change to their manufacturing line, they don't have to wait 2.5 years for a minor model change like you do in the automotive industry. If they want to make a more significant change to their processes, they don't have to wait 5 to 7 years for a new model. And if they want to radically change the flow of their team, they don't have to wait 30 to 40 years for a factory to be end of life. They delete a directory. They change source code check-in rules. They change the flow of conversation and sign-off. Because of this, they started having hundreds of iterations a month, which eventually moved to hundreds of iterations a week. And then something happens in software that doesn't happen as often in physical manufacturing. They went to conferences like this and shared those ideas. And you began to have millions of iteration on process. So much so that software had to come up with multiple names just to keep the successful flavors straight. And that's where we started to have terms like Agile, Lean, Scrum, Rational Unified Process, and others. What WIKISPEED has done is tried to take test-driven development, extreme programming, Scrum, object-oriented programming, and Kanban back to their roots in manufacturing and rapid prototyping. Agile for large project engineering. I've been asked many times, what's a litmus test to know if I'm in an Agile team, or if I'm founding an Agile company, or if we're behaving in an Agile way? Luckily, there's a pretty easy to see metric of to least to know if we're not in an Agile team or an Agile company. And that is, are we committing to contracts that say what we're going to do and when we're going to do it? So an Agile team would say, I know we're going to be building a subdivision here, and I know we want people to be moving in on this date. But what I won't be able to tell you is how many square feet all the houses will be, how many windows all the houses will have, or even the net number of houses. But I can commit that you will have move-in ready houses by this date. And when we think about it, how often does the surveyor put stakes in the ground that exactly match the plan from back in the shop? How often are wetlands discovered? How often is the grade not quite what we perceived? How often do we run into soil types that we didn't expect and we're on glacial till and we didn't think we were past that certain depth? How often does the building end up being a few inches, a few feet, or a few tenths of feet or meters different than what we'd originally thought in the planning phase? Agile says, here's a way to embrace it. And so the contract to an Agile team is either this date or exactly this outcome. But one of those has to be understood to be flexible from the beginning, or you're not in an Agile team. You can't be. It won't work. What WIKISPEED is up to next is everything we learned during the Progressive Insurance X Prize about increasing efficiency. Most of it relied on building a very different type of car using very different methods. Some of it we were able to package into a small device that applies to existing automotive transportation. And this is it. This is WIKISPEEDlet, the tiniest piece that gives meaningful fuel efficiency improvements. And this is the future of WIKISPEED. It's our minimal marketable feature, the tiniest thing that might actually help change the world for the better in terms of green automotive. Now, we're absolutely moving forward with our car and having a great time with that. It's a whole lot of fun to drive. But this is likely our first future. What's next for us is let people know that this works and how, so we can reduce global waste and increase global value. We want to help stop having factories and R&D teams look like software teams from the 1970s and more like software teams now, where you have Facebook or Twitter at a coffee shop with 3 laptops. And that's the team. We'll iterate our passenger cars to increase user realized value and indirectly make bazillions. We don't have a profit motive, but when you have a product that's this disruptive, we might be doomed to become wealthy, and we'll have to figure out how to cope with that. WIKISPEED to reduce fuel consumption of existing automobiles, that's in development right now, and in fact, we're working with the Marine Corps Land Vehicles Development Division to see if we can increase fuel economy there, which is a great first stepping stone. And right now, we're in micro-manufacture. We're prepping our Michigan car for customer lease. We're prepping our Seattle car for a long-distance road trip. We're pairing with Roush Industries to develop our airbag system. And we are now building our interactive exhibit for the Future of Flight Center at Boeing's Payne Field. When can I buy one? How can I help? I'm glad you asked. We do actually sell clones of our X Prize race car now. Now, those aren't for everybody. They don't have cup holders. In fact, I'm not even happy with the windshield wiper system. There's a lot to do for it to be the car I want it to be for my grandmother to drive in. But for early adopters, collectors, or people that say, I want 100 miles per gallon right now, we actually have that, road legal. And those cars, we sell them now for $28,886. The next project is our 4-seat commuter car, or what we call in team the C3, the comfy commuter car. And that's the car that I'd love to put my grandmother in. And that's the car where if we're really trying to change fuel consumption and emissions at a globally noticeable level, we can't be selling 200 cars. We can't be selling 2,000 cars. We need to be targeting hundreds of thousands. If that's going to even be possible, if we're even going to have the door open to that, we need it to be a car that's sold at the price that the widest transaction level of the marketplace sells for, which is under $20,000. So that car is targeted for under $20,000. And its timeline is 12 months of development after a 400K or higher funding event, which is one of the pieces we pursue now. And everyone here is invited to join the team. My email is info@wikispeed.com. In team, we have the lead aerodynamicist from GM for 40 years. We have the gentleman who founded the material science lab at MIT. We have a gentleman who taught nuclear physics at West Point. We have a gentleman who was the operating colonel of the largest military research facility in the world. We have engineers from NASA, Lockheed Martin, the US Air Force, Bridgestone Tire, Continental Tire, and others. And we have a whole lot of people who have never changed their own oil and say, this is very green and I want to be a part of it, how do I help? And we have this broad blend. I'm from the software industry, right? So it's definitely not cars. And we're pushing the envelope. And anyone could allocate 2 hours a week, 4 hours a week, 40 hours a week, and be part of that. Every Thursday at 7 p.m., we have a build party at the closest facility here is by Elmwood Mall, and then the next closest is in Everett. But as cool as it would be if everyone in the room joined Team WIKISPEED, what would be even cooler is if everyone in the room went after what we really care about, which is solving problems for social good. I'm a car nerd, I'm an efficiency nerd, and I'm a process nerd. So what I'm doing with Team WIKISPEED, although there's many pieces we work in, the piece that has the most visibility right now is the car. But maybe one of you is really great with refrigeration technologies, or really good with the last mile vaccine delivery deployments, or really good with microfinancing for the developing world and investment opportunities for very small distributed investments, or global health or water sanitation and hygiene issues. For example, the rotavirus vaccine requires refrigeration for delivery to be effective. And at the rural areas where it's still the largest problem and the most children die every year from rotavirus, it induces diarrhea and it's fatal. Part of that delivery mechanism involves hand carrying hacked by animal, or in some cases, they're able to get some types of cheats there. That vaccine has a shelf life before it expires due to its refrigeration requirements. If someone here had a powdered detergent that fit in a FedEx envelope triangle, they might be able to save millions of children's lives a year. What we found in Team WIKISPEED is by spending our Thursday nights, and then a few other random nights and weekends, but it's all nights and weekends. We all have day jobs. And in some cases, team members spend an hour a week. We're actually able to push the envelope of what we thought was even possible with global major issues for social good. Some of you might be able to say, you know what, instead of catching up on 4 seasons of Lost, I might be able to have a prototype of that refrigerated package that I can send out with vaccine delivery. Or I might be able to have a working V1 of a cell phone-enabled investment engine for micro-investment and microfinancing for the sub-Saharan Africa Nigerian diaspora, who still have an issue of putting their money in their home, under their bed, or hiding it somewhere while they go out and work their field, because that's the option that's available to them. They do have data plans on cell phones. In the time it would take you to watch 1 season of 24, you might be able to have a working V1 of that product. I'd encourage folks to take any time away from potentially entertainment, but even something that's considered typically very good, like coaching Little League. What a great thing to do. But maybe you could spend that time saving millions of lives, or another issue that's directly related to a tricky problem for global social good. And if everyone in this room did, it would be so awesome. It would be like Mega Shark high-fiving King Kong in front of an explosion. And that's the challenge I have for this group today, and I'd love it if some folks would take it. And I think I've gone over, so I'll leave up an engineering stats slide and see if there's any questions, or if we're told we need to move over to the other room. I guess I'll take questions if folks have them until they tell us to head over. If there are any, please raise your hand.
Joe, you could be available for a few minutes afterwards in case people want to just join in.
Absolutely. I plan to stay through to the end, and I believe there's a cocktail reception. I'm not sure, something at the end. I plan to be there. And also, my personal email is info@wikispeed.com, so things can fire there. Folks, thank you so much. I appreciate you hearing what WIKISPEED's about, how we do it, how we're able to work quickly, and that what we really like to do is help change the world and make it the world we want to live in, and amazingly, it doesn't actually take very much time, energy, effort, or resources to do so. Thank you very much.